hope you're all doing well today, and I hope you're excited to paint along with me. This is going to be really easy. We're going to do this step by step, and I'm working on a 16 by 20 black primed canvas. I just used regular black paint and painted over an old canvas that I had lying around. So we're going to be using a few different brushes and a very limited palette. I'll list everything below in the description, as well as links to my Patreon where you can watch ad-free longer tutorials. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started, guys. Okay, so working on a 16 by 20 black primed canvas. As I said earlier, we're going to be using Mars Black, yellow ochre, lemon yellow, and titanium white. Starting with a very small Filbert brush, just going to get it wet, and I'm going to make a light gray color, mixing both black and titanium white together. I'm going to do a basic outline of where the hair starts on the top of the head, and then work my way down from there into more feathers and more details. Okay, so I don't show this, but I am going back for more paint, and it's just that light gray every time. I'm also using a little bit of water just to help work that paint on my brush nice and evenly. And I'm working around the eye right now, so I'm just doing these little lines that get closer and tighter together and shorter strokes underneath the eye, and they're longer and curve over on the top right corner. Now it's going to be really bright here, and I'm just going to eventually keep adding more and more white till I work my way up to my brightest highlights. And then we're doing the same thing over here above the other eye on the left side, and I'm starting to just make little wispy lines and hairs with this brush. You can also use a liner brush or a larger Filbert brush. You can use a flat brush. Really, guys, a round brush would work as well. I just really recommend that when you're doing the finer details, you use a smaller brush, a finer haired brush for the little wispy hairs and individual hairs that you want to do. So later on in this video, you'll see that I switch over to my even tail fan brush. It's my newest favorite brush that I've been showing you guys and talking about in my last few videos. It's a really fun one, and it comes in quite handy for painting hairs, palm leaves, waterfalls. Every day I'm finding more and more uses for it. So here I'm just going to curve down, like I said, adding more of the white. I still have a little bit of the gray in my brush, and because I'm not using a ton of paint, you can still see the black underneath. And it's really nice to use a black primed canvas for a painting like this, because it makes your paintings extra striking. It makes things pop out quite quickly. Sometimes it can take a while to build up that highlight and shadow and contrast when you're working on a regular white canvas. And some of us that are just beginning to paint can be a little bit intimidated and think, you know, maybe we're not getting anywhere in our paintings. However, if you paint on a black primed canvas, you'll see instant results that'll keep you motivated and keep you wanting to paint. So that's just a little tip that I've learned over the years. Black canvases are kind of magical to me anyways. I love the way things just really pop off the canvas and come to life instantly. So I'm working on the beak now, still with that gray, and then I'm going to start to add a little highlight. And I'm going to kind of drag my brush, a dry brush, over where I want it to look shiny and have that light hitting it. So I'm just working on his beak, making it kind of like a half circle on the bottom right of his beak, and then I'm going to go back in with Mars Black here, make it completely in shadow, and then it's going to be white around the beak from all of his feathers and hair, and then it's going to come over in a tiny little point at the bottom, almost like a little hook, but it's going to be a round softed end to it, so nothing too sharp. And then I'll start pulling and wisping out the little hairs and feathers here. So he's got a little pattern on the top of his head, as you can see here, and they're just little, almost like little rectangles or little squares, and then some of them don't have spaces in between. They're just more of like a sort of a messy line. And you can do this just by pushing and wiggling really quickly back and forth, side to side with your brush, any brush of your choice, a small one, obviously for working in a small space like this. And then, so I'm just going to work out the little pattern here that I want, and then I'll concentrate on my lights and darks after. So now that I've got his beak roughly the shape that I want, I'm going to come in and start building up more of the feathers and more of the highlights here. So I'm increasing my white, not completely straight white. There's always a little bit of that gray tone left in my brush until the end when I want to use just straight white. And also I use straight white for the little dot, the highlight or reflection in his eyeball. Now this is really different for me to paint an owl, especially in a limited palette like this. I know you guys are probably wondering, wow, this doesn't look like anything Joni's painted before, but if you guys have a look through my channel, you'll see the odd black and white painting. And way back in the day, when I first began painting, or maybe it was about 5 or 6 years into my art journey, I focused on and did a study of black and white paintings, and I just worked on detail, and I actually did very, very realistic looking paintings. That was years ago, and I don't paint like that anymore. I kind of got looser over the years and comfortable with using lots of color and looser brush strokes. But once in a while, I go back to my old ways of painting, and I happen to really, really love owls. I've mentioned that before. You guys might have heard me talk about owls and my little owl story about having one kind of just swoop down in front of the window while I was sitting on the couch and landed on an old tree stump right in front of me, and it was just a really magical moment. So I kind of feel like they're and I had like a lot of wonderful things happen that following week. It was almost like it was a good luck omen or something. So they're very meaningful to me, and I just think that they're very mysterious, beautiful, beautiful creatures. And I decided to give it a go on this black canvas. Kind of just decided, spur of the moment this morning, and took a few hours to clean up my studio a little bit, get prepared, have a cup of coffee, and then I just went at it and really, really enjoyed myself. I was actually really, really excited to make this video and tutorial for you guys. So I wonder what you guys are thinking. If you like this, if you want to see more, I've got a few more ideas for animals and birds that I'm going to, even some fish. There's some fish that I just think are really pretty, like the betta fish. They're very pretty, and I may try a few more things on a black canvas. But back to this painting, you guys can see what I've been doing. I've been using this little fan brush here with a bit of water to help the bristles kind of spread apart, kind of like how my even tail looks, but I wasn't ready to go to my even tail yet. I want my hairs to look a little bit more messy and sporadic right now, whereas the even tail is called even for a reason. They're separated all evenly, so I didn't want it to look like a pattern yet. But I'm coming around, starting to get this eye shape correct here, and I'm just going to go with the little bit of white I have, some water, and just a little bit of gray. In between here, we've got a few layers here. We've got the white, and then we've got a dark section right here. So I'm going to add more black in here and then come in with more of my white. And just pulling gently back and forth, and then scumbling kind of side to side, just wiggling quickly. That's all a scumble really is. All right, picking up more of the white now, I'm going to start building up my highlights. I've got a nice mid-tone, mid-gray there, and I'm going to use the corner of my brush at times and then just pull in to create the shape of his eye that's not quite a perfect circle. You'll see it kind of goes up in a little bit of a point, There's a little bit of an angle there, just very slight though. And then I'm going to pull and fan out with my brush for softer, shorter little hairs here that are very close to his eyeball. So one thing about the fan brush is that it doesn't hold a lot of paint because the hairs are so, well, this one anyways, it's very small and fine. And there's a lot of give to it too. I really like the bristles on this brush, but you need to reload your brush quite often, and to help that paint flow and look wispy and feather-like on the end there, I use a little bit of water. So just note that the more water you use, the more see-through and dull your paint is going to look when it dries. It might look bright at first because it's wet. So if you want it to be really bright, then use obviously more paint than water. So I probably got 50-50 right now that I'm using. Actually, no, I don't. It's probably more like 70-30, just because it's like pretty solid there around the eyeball. And then right here, it's just straight paint, just straight titanium white where I want it to be really, really bright here. So it comes down in a scoop and then pulls out. Kind of looks like a sunflower. That's probably a good way to describe it, except we're not going to get any of those feathers going on the top, towards the top left there. We're just going to leave that a scoop like that. And you just want to create short little pulls and flicks. I'm going back into my gray now because in the corner of his eye there's a bit of a shadow there where it's a little bit darker, so I'm going to create a dark gray. Then I'm going to come in with a little bit more black and clean up his eye, and then later on I'll add a little bit of an off-white to create some small, really, really tiny little feathers there in the corner of his eye, just so that it goes gradually from light to dark or dark to light. So these are behind the hairs and the feathers that are coming out of his eyes. This is just more like on his forehead, I guess. And they're just short little ones, and then they go up on the left, and that little scoop. Okay, so his other eye here on the left, we can barely see it. It's just like a very, very skinny oval in black, but I haven't actually added that in yet. I'm just leaving the black canvas there for now, going over with my hairs, and then I'm going to decide how I want my eye to look there, and I'm going to come in with a smaller brush for that. So I'm going to start building up more feathers on that side of his face, behind his beak. And the hairs on around the left eye are going to be kind of softer. They're going to be a little bit darker than the one on the right side. That one's the one that really draws our eye in, literally, to this painting, right? It's very eye-catching. So that one has a lot of detail, but the one on the left we don't see very much, so it's just going to be kind of a mid-gray color, not too dark, not too light, and I'll be adding a little black line in there a little bit later on. So I'm going to add a few more hairs, just little lines, using my fan brush. Like I said, fan brushes can take you really far in a painting. Instead of using a liner brush and having to try to be even and paint all these little lines, which can be very challenging to do, because it's hard to have control over a liner brush. I don't like to use them that often unless I really, really have to. But the fan brush does all of those lines all at once pretty much for you. It's just about knowing the right ratio of water and paint to use. But you should really, really practice if you're new at painting and you're not very familiar with the fan brush. I've got quite a few videos about fan brushes, and just take something old, an old piece of paper or canvas or cardboard, anything laying around, and just experiment with it and get a feel for it. That way you don't have to worry about wrecking a painting. You could just do all of that practice and get really familiar with it. So yeah, working on a black canvas, instantly you get so much depth, as you can see here, especially when you're working in black and white. It's important to have the mid-tones, the light grays, all those shades of gray in there. And that really helps to bring it all together. So I'm just starting to pull in more singular lines and feathers in here. So turning my brush to make it skinny and then using the corner of it. But I will be switching over to a few other brushes here pretty soon. Now these little feathers are really cool. They're just short little ones that are bunched up just kind of under his chin there, or under his eye. And they're like little waves, little scoopy waves, and I kind of had fun. Well, I really had fun actually painting this entire painting. I really enjoyed that. Sometimes I have paintings where I'm really having a good time, but then I get to a point where I have something's a bit challenging in it, and I'm not sure what I should do or how I should approach it, especially when it comes to figures and animals or birds. But this one in particular, I don't think there was a time when I wasn't really enjoying myself. And I really hope that you guys give this one a try too. I think you're going to be really surprised and really impressed with yourselves working on a black canvas and doing this. And I hope that I hope I'm making this look doable, and that I've broken it down into easy to follow along steps here. I think that it helps to have a limited palette. It's not so overwhelming for you guys. You don't even have to use the yellow ochre or the lemon yellow. You can just stick strictly to white and black if you want. So there you see I'm just adding, I've got my liner brush now, just for finer singular lines and hairs, and I'm gonna come around and add this little, it's like a crescent moon really. And then just that little dab. And part of this ring, the color of his eye is going to be a lot brighter than the top and the bottom part of it, where it gets close to the little white dot. So that's going to be a little bit a shadow that I come in with colors later, and I add both yellows with white for the brightest part, and then at the skinnier shadowed part of the ring, I even bring in a little bit of my neon red with the yellow ochre, and I thought that looked really cool. Okay, holding my brush kind of flat and just dragging and pulling very lightly, barely touching that canvas. I'm able to get sort of a rounded look to his beak for where that highlight is. And then I'm just going to keep on building up all these little feathers and hairs, one by one. And then when I come in with my even tail brush, fan brush, and filbert brush, I'll be able to finish it off quite quickly. This painting really doesn't take a lot of time, and this is a good size canvas. You know, you could do this probably a lot quicker on an 11 by 14 canvas. Anything smaller than 11 by 14, you're gonna have to use smaller brushes though. Just keep that in mind. You need to pick brushes that are appropriate for the size of canvas that you're working on. All right, so I'm going to start adding some more feathers up there above his left eye, using more and more white and less water, being very light and just little tiny flicks. And then I'm going to add some more white to this little pattern on his head, just little dabs, dots and dabs. You just want to add a little bit. You don't want to cover it up completely. We want to see all those different tones of grays in there, don't we? That's what makes it really nice and soft. If you have way too much contrast, you just have black and white only, and that can be actually really striking, but that's not what I'm going for here. I want to have those, when I do black and whites, I like to have lots of midtones. I like it to feel soft and striking at the same time, if that makes sense. So I'm going to come in here as well with more white, really building up my highlights now. Again, just using a liner brush. This one I think is a number 2, but liner brushes are really personal preference. Find what works for you and what you feel comfortable with. All the years I've been teaching, all my students have always complained about the liner brush when they're just first starting to paint. So I think you just really have to, try a few different brushes, different hairs, different lengths, are a big key. It's really hard to do fine detail if you've got a liner brush that's too long, the hair on it is too long, but sometimes you want to have a liner brush that's got long, the end on it that's really long for, like painting long lines and like grass blades and like this. I could have actually switched over to my longer liner brush. It's one that I'm always losing though, and my cat always seems to, we have a little game going, I think. He thinks that anyways. Henry, my cat, is always hiding my long liner brush on me for some reason. So I think I just stuck to this one because I didn't want to take time away to have to go hunt for that. But back to here, just right by where it's really black, we've got full contrast here, black right over to the white. And so see how his eye comes up kind of in a little angle right there, up in a little point, and then tiny little hairs that eventually get a little bit bigger and bigger. Okay, so now with a little bit more white, a little bit of water on my brush, I'm going to do a little squiggly line. Then I'm going to pull and flick down to just softly blend that in there, and then I'm going to begin to make some larger feathers. So I'm going over to my Filbert brush, and because I'm working on smaller feathers here, I'm going to use my smaller Filbert brush. So when you have big feathers, you may want to switch over to your larger Filbert. Now I like the Filbert because it's rounded, but it also kind of goes into a soft rounded point on the end, which is kind of the perfect shape for these feathers. It's a really nice brush to use for flower petals too. I'm just defining these little wavy lines a little bit more, and then I'm going to come down and just start pulling and flicking, and then see what I mean, how the brush shape kind of you just push and pull and let off. It almost gives you like an almond shape. And I'm not using full-on white. I've got a light gray with some water on my brush right now. So I'm leaving some spaces for that black canvas to show through, so we've got a nice shadow, and that will help us to create that depth. I'm going to come around on the left side, start adding some feathers and more of his body. But it's really easy. I can't wait to see what you guys accomplish from this tutorial. I love all of you guys sharing your paintings on Instagram. That's the best place to share it. Or you can email me, but Instagram seems to be the place where everybody likes to share. So I'll leave a link below. It's just Joni Young Art on Instagram. But yeah, I think you guys are really going to enjoy this one. So he's got just like a little dot there, light gray, not really a circle, just kind of like the little patches on top of his head. And now you can see I'm using longer brush strokes at the bottom, and I'm going to paint fewer feathers. So they're small up by his eyes and his head and his neck, and then as they get down to the bottom, they're going to be quite large, so we're not going to have as many. And I'm going to still use this Filbert brush. Then I'm going to switch to back to my fan brush, where I'll be adding a few more of the feathers on those feathers, or the hairs. So you can see this painting is really coming together quite quickly. This is pretty much in real time. I think there was one part of this video that I sped up just the tiniest bit, really, but this is in real time. And it just goes to show you guys that you don't need to take weeks, days, or spend hours on end creating a painting. Just follow these simple steps that I'm showing you guys today, and trust me, working on a black canvas with a limited palette, you'll be able to create something that you never thought you'd be able to. And I just love hearing your stories of how, you know, some of you are in your 70s and you say that you've never painted before, and all of a sudden you just decided that you wanted to learn, and you guys have picked up painting and have realized how much you love it. And you know, I just love all of your stories that you guys share with me. It means so much to me. I love hearing everybody's art journeys and where they started and what brought them to wanting to paint and where it's taking you. So I'm going to add some more highlights here. I just want these little waves, these little curves here and feathers to stand out a little bit more. So I'm doing those little lines for the curves, and then I'm lining my brush up on them and pulling the opposite direction. So I'm going to go up, sort of on an angle towards the corner of the eye. And then I'm going to swoop down a little bit here. Add a few more highlights. It's all about building up the layers. You can't skip any of them, or your painting just won't be the same. It's important to have all those layers in between. So I've got my really cool even tail brush here, as you can see. It's a fan brush with little sections cut out evenly. And so I got it wet first, dunked it in the water, and then went straight over to my gray and a little bit of white, as you can see there. And I'm just going to pull and flick now. So see how it leaves those spaces? So you can see the other shades of gray and the black underneath. So that's why this brush works really, really wonderfully for waterfalls and palm trees too. So I'm kind of wiggling a little bit right at the base there. Wiggle, wiggle with the corner of my brush, and then pull out and flick in an arch. All around the side. I'm going to take it down here and start pulling in some separate little feathers. Add just a little bit more detail, and then the rest of the bottom of the owl and the canvas, I want it to be a little bit more in shadow and kind of less detailed. I just don't want the whole canvas to be really busy. I want our eyes to be drawn in and focus where his eye is, mainly around his eye and his beak. So I'm just going to work on his eye a little bit more here. I'm adding a little bit more of a light gray, and I added a little bit too much white in there, so I'm just going to try and balance it out with a little bit of darker gray or a bit of black. And the hairs don't come out really far or wide, so I'm trying to keep it narrow right in there. And then you can still see a faint line of black, but it's not necessarily big enough. So I'm going to come in after and add some black, just so that we know there's an eye there. Well, this brush is so much fun to use. Let me know in the comments if you guys have one of these brushes yet. I got mine from Michael's, but I'm sure you can get them at any fine art store or online. So here I come out just a little bit too far with those feathers, so I'm just gonna very lightly take it off with my finger. Trying to get as close as I can to the beak without wrecking the shape or messing it up. So I just want it to be really bright right behind the beak and right underneath. Okay, so I'm going to add another little layer here, right at the edge of where those little lines end. And it's going to be a little bit wiggly and fuzzy, so I'm using the corner of my brush for that. And then I'm going to come in and just light gray, and then come back in with a damp Filbert brush and just soften that a little bit. So just wiggling very carefully and blending it slightly. And some of them are going to be a little bit longer. It's not all going to be even, right? It kind of looks wiggly and wavy. I have a few little hairs that are longer and shorter. Back to my even tail brush. Start right where that black is, that black ring, his eye, and then pull and flick out so it's brightest. Most of the paint is coming off right on that white line. Okay, so for the next little bit here, I'm just going to keep going over and building up my highlights, creating some more definition. And then when I want to have finer lines, I'm going to use it the full width and pull and flick, and then you could see me turn my brush and use kind of just the end of my brush to create thicker, more singular, separate hairs. So remember what I said, they're not going to have it too bright here on the bottom of the canvas. It's going to be kind of just like a dark gray, maybe a lighter gray in a few spots, but we really don't want to have any bright white down there. It's all about drawing our eyes into his face. Okay, so I've built up another layer of highlights here, and I'm going to start concentrating on his eye. So I've got a clean liner brush, No water, just straight Mars black. Any black will be fine though. In fact, any white you want to use is fine too. You don't have to have titanium white. And I'm just going to do a curve, a long curve, not even a half circle. I would make it a little bit straighter than that. And then make it a little bit turned in and rounded towards the bottom. And then just define that with a bit of white. Now I'm going to start working on his eye. I've got some paint left over from yesterday, but it's dry on the outside, but I know it's still wet on the inside, so I'm trying to get into it right now. So I'll be using the lemon yellow and some white first, and I'm going to go over that little ring there. So I'm going to focus on, remember the brightest spot of that ring that looks like a crescent moon is going to be right in here. I'm going to do a few layers because it is kind of drying a little bit darker, so I don't show you, but I'm actually going to blow dry it off with my hair dryer for a couple seconds, and then go right back to adding more of the yellow and the white. And then I'm going to leave it dark on either end of it, and then increase the color by adding yellow ochre and a little bit of my neon red. But right here, it's just yellow ochre. And I think this is what really makes the eye stand out, is having the color difference there, but have it kind of gradually pull into each other, so it's not an abrupt change of color, right? It gradually goes into that yellow. And then I'm just going to scumble around just the tiniest bit of that yellow ochre that's really watered down on my brush, so hardly anything at all. Okay, so it's time for another layer now after I dried it off. Coming back in with some more white and some more of that lemon yellow. And I'm going to come in with a few more feathers down here. Just going to dab a little bit more light gray on that little patch down there, that little kind of a circle. And just using my liner brush, pulling and wisping and flicking to create little feathers and singular hairs. I'll add a little bit more white to his beak now, where I want it to be bright white and shiny looking. And I'm just using a dry brush for that, no water at all. I'm going to pull a little bit of black in between some of the feathers here to show the beak through. It's a little bit too solid looking, so I need a little bit more of his beak. So just a little bit more of the black. Okay, I'm ready to add another layer on his eye. I want this to be the brightest. So now I'm using just white with lemon yellow. You're going to want to use more white than the yellow to make it really nice and bright once it's all dried. Then I'm going into my yellow ochre and adding it with my lemon yellow, and I'm just going to add it right on either end and have it gradually blend in. Next, neon red, just a tiny bit of that neon or fluorescent red. You can use any red or even orange or neon pink to mix in with your yellow ochre for this. And another color that would work probably really well would be burnt sienna. Just a very, very thin, tiny amount and layer of burnt sienna would look great. I just couldn't resist. I had to sneak a little neon paint in there somewhere. So I'm just defining the black part of his eye now. Doing a final few brush strokes here before I call this one all done. Little tap of dark gray in there. for the tiny little feathers and shadows that we've got going on. And I'm going to add my final highlights. A little dab right there with some more white just to finish off his eye. I'm going to do a few more little hairs, and then I'm going to switch over to my fan brush again and finish off all of his feathers down on the bottom. So you'll see I'll take a little combination of the yellow ochre, maybe a little bit of the lemon yellow, and I'm just going to right here mix them together. So lemon yellow, yellow ochre, and more white and water. And you can hardly even see that it's there. It's so subtle. It's really just creating a creamy white color, sort of like ivory. And I'm just going to continue pulling and flicking on both sides and then bring it down into a point. So sometimes I'm going up from the point to the end of each of those feathers, and I'm pulling and flicking up. So you can use your brush, you can, in different ways, you can create these feathers in any way that works for you. Just really have fun experimenting with a fan brush, filbert brush, liner brush, and yeah, I can't wait to hear what you guys think about this painting today, and I'm excited to see all of your versions from this tutorial. I'm going to keep working my way down here towards the bottom, adding just some subtle highlights, indication that we've got more feathers that go down here, but again, not too bright. We don't want to have bright white on the bottom. We're keeping that up towards his face area. This painting is all done, and I hope you guys enjoyed watching this one today. Give this video a thumbs up and subscribe for more. Thanks guys, have a wonderful day and happy painting. Bye!